Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. In men's junior middleweight news, on the heels of his win, quote-unquote win, over Sergey Bohachuk, Virgil Ortiz speaks on the rest of his division. I'm more than confident I can beat everyone in the division. I feel like I'm the best in this division. I just need the fights to show that. I'm willing to fight anyone. I've never turned a fight down. Paco Veracel, the president of the WBO, would say the opposite. He said, well over a year ago, I think it's been 2, maybe more, that Virgil rejected a fight with Terence Crawford, not once, but twice. The opportunity to fight him.
Paco Veracel ain't got no reason to lie.
And he ain't got no reason to make all of that up. So once again, Terence Crawford and Virgil Ortiz are campaigning at the same weight.
Once again, Terence Crawford is a champion and Virgil is a challenger.
And there is an ongoing conversation about them, a fight between them, though even if that doesn't happen, the junior middleweight division is a very deep division. You have to remember that Virgil Ortiz, in beating Sergey Bohachuk, became WBC interim champion. Sebastian Fundora is the full champion.
Virgil is in line to challenge him.
Just getting away from all the Terence Crawford stuff, you have to remember Virgil's in line to fight for a title. It might not be Terence's title, though, all the same. He's in line. So who do you like? Virgil Ortiz or Sebastian Fundora? It's widespread speculation as to what Sebastian is going to do next. What's he going to do with the time that remains in this year? Is he going to have the Spence fight? Is he going to fight somebody else?
Is Spence unavailable?
He probably is. He probably is. I've maintained a healthy level of skepticism when it comes to that fight.
I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't even know if Sebastian is going to fight again before this year is out.
With Spence, with Crawford, with anybody.
I don't even know if Sebastian is going to fight again before this year is out. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't.
Nope.
I wouldn't be surprised if he sits out all of what remains of this year and comes back next year for a Tim Tszyu rematch.
And Virgil?
Well, that's what makes things interesting. I think it's the PBC's plan to have the winner of Tszyu versus Murtazaliev, which I think is going to be Tim Tszyu. I think it's their plan to put that guy in the ring with Sebastian next year. So if they have to come out of one of those titles to do that, say the WBC title,
I think they will.
I think that now that Al Haymon is back from his hiatus from the sport, he's not going to sacrifice his fighters to someone else, to someone else's fighters. He's going to keep as much in-house as he possibly can, and that means Tszyu versus Fundora too, which I'm not against.
And it's still a unification match.
Even if Sebastian drops the WBC to get Virgil off his back, well, he's still got the WBO.
But isn't Terence Crawford the mandatory via the WBO?
He is, via his super champion status, but I don't see him hitting the gas on that. I don't see what wheels are in motion right now to put Terence in the ring with Sebastian or force Sebastian to come up out of that title. It's been weeks since Terence Crawford fought Israel Madrimov.
Sebastian hasn't been stripped. I haven't seen anything about a deadline.
Most of the talk centered around Terence Crawford is still centered around a potential Canelo fight, not necessarily a Sebastian Fundora fight. So I don't know. If Terence doesn't hit the gas with the WBO, maybe Sebastian will get to keep the brown belt. And if he keeps the brown belt, maybe he can bring it to a Tim Tszyu rematch, which would then be a unification match.
That I'm not against.
I'm not against those two guys running it back, especially if there are 2 alphabet titles on the line. I think there's a legitimate precedent for Tim and Sebastian to fight again, irrespective of Terence or irrespective of Virgil. I do think Sebastian and Tim should fight again.
But where Terence and Virgil come into it is that jointly, those are Sebastian's mandatories. Terence's is mandatory via the WBO, Virgil's is mandatory via the WBC, and if one or some of them want their title shot, Sebastian has to answer to them.
It's an immaterial situation where the picture isn't clear, so I'll try to keep this as simple as I can. If Sebastian sits out the rest of this year and doesn't come back till next year, if he fights Tim Tszyu again, I think Tim Tszyu wins the rematch.
I think Tim Tszyu beats him.
He beats Sebastian Fundora. Now, if Sebastian doesn't fight Tim again, say he fights Virgil Ortiz because the WBC orders him to fight Virgil Ortiz, I think Virgil might beat him too.
He might.
And Terence Crawford? What about Terence Crawford?
He might.
So basically, you think everybody beats Sebastian Fundora. You think Tim beats Sebastian, Virgil beats Sebastian, and Terence beats Sebastian.
Yes.
Is that the gist of it?
Yes.
Well, Sebastian has been beat before. By a lesser fighter than those fighters, he got beat by Brian Mendoza. I didn't forget.
Brian's not on the level of Virgil Ortiz. Brian's not on the level of Terence Crawford, and we know he's not on the level of Tim Tszyu. Tim beat him.
Yeah, but Sebastian beat Tim.
Yeah, after a gash opened up on the top of his head, blood seeped into his eye, and he couldn't see.
Unless that happens in a rematch, I have Tim winning a rematch. I think Sebastian is the weakest link at 154. And whoever ends up opposite the ring him, whether it's Terence or Virgil or Tim for a second time, I think they beat him.
The picture is murky at 154, and I don't necessarily know what's next or who's next for Sebastian.
I'm not sure, but if it's a fight with any one of those three fighters, I think any one of those three guys beats Sebastian, and that's the takeaway. That junior middleweight picture, in spite of its depth, has become quite immaterial over time, and it's hard to know who's gonna do what. Eddie Hearn told Michael Benson that he doesn't think Terence Crawford will ever fight again.
What?
I don't think Terence Crawford will fight again because I think he's made really solid money in his last couple of fights. I don't think he wants to fight Virgil or Jaron Ennis. I think the only way Crawford will fight again is against Canelo because he's gotten used to that pay. He probably thinks he'll fight again, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. So inactive as well.
I think he's happy to sit out until the end of next year.
He'll be just waiting for Canelo if the Canelo fight comes up.
I don't like the sound of that.
Eddie Hearn is in the loop. Eddie Hearn is in the know. Terence Crawford is working with Turkey, and so is Eddie Hearn, so maybe Eddie is privy to things that we haven't heard yet.
I don't like the sound of that.
For the first time in a long time, Terence has the opportunity to fight more than once in a single calendar year. For a perspective, Terence Crawford has been fighting once a year for the last 4 going on 5 years.
The last time this guy fought more than once in a single calendar year was in 2019. Since then, he's been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 4 going on 5 years.
So here and now, when he has Turkey LL Sheik behind him, invested in his career, and willing to put big money up to find him opponents, if he sits out what remains of this year, I don't like the sound of that because this is the opportunity that you've been looking for, that you may have been needing. Maybe the issue is that this opportunity didn't come to him until he was in his mid-30s, 41 fights into his pro career.
He's already had the Spence fight, the legacy-defining fight, the fight that he waited for 5 years. Maybe his appetite for the sport isn't what it was before he had that fight.
Maybe. Terence Crawford is in that pound-for-pound conversation, that number 1 pound-for-pound conversation, alongside names like Usyk, Inoue, Canelo.
Who's number 1?
It depends on who you ask. To some people it's Usyk, to some people it's Inoue, and to some people it's Canelo, and to others it's Terence Crawford. What's counting against Terence Crawford compared to those fighters, those guys, is they fight more often than he does.
By year's end, Alexander Usyk will have fought 2 times. By year's end, Canelo Alvarez will have fought 2 times. By year's end, Inoue will have fought 3 times, where Terence may end up fighting only once. Just once.
So depending on what your criterion is, what exactly governs your pound-for-pound list, if anything does, aside from your feelings?
Fuck your feelings.
Why should Terence Crawford be ranked ahead of so many fighters, so many accomplished fighters, just as accomplished as he is, that are more active than he is? Why should he be ranked ahead of them? That if this year comes and goes, and all he does is fight Israel Madrimov, I don't see why he should be at number 1. And he's not. Currently, he's not on my list.
He's in the top 5, but he's not number 1 on mine.
Inactivity is why. Inactivity counts against him in a way that it doesn't count against Inoue, it doesn't count against Canelo, it doesn't count against Usyk, but it counts against him.
He's been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 4 going on 5 years.
The testament to your pound-for-pound status is how many times you get out there and how many times you are successful. So if so many of these other fighters that are just as accomplished, if not more accomplished, than he is, if they're getting out there more often and showing their shit
more often than he is, why should he be ranked ahead of them?
Why?
Because he's a 2-time undisputed champion? He knew he's a 2-time undisputed champion. He's more active than Terence. Why?
Because he's a 2-time undisputed champion. Usyk is a two-time undisputed champion. In his last fight, he fought a guy at a 37-pound weight disadvantage. 37 pounds.
This Terence ever fought a guy that weighed 37 pounds more than he did.
It's not a knock on Terence. If he wants to take his foot off the gas at this late stage in his career, he can, and you can sympathize. And I would understand that, but what I wouldn't understand is him being number one when he doesn't fight as often as these other guys.
Fighting is what got you up there, and fighting is what keeps you there.
He's WBA junior middleweight champion now. He can always make defenses of his newly obtained title to stay active, to stay busy, which would count towards his reign and his legacy, if he so chooses. But if what he chooses is to sit out, I'm not going to reward him for that.
That ain't how this works.
I think it's unfortunate that it took so long for Terence Crawford's career to gain the kind of stability that Turkey could provide, at least theoretically. But here and now, at 36, going on 37 years old, 41 fights into his pro career.
41 fights in.
Maybe what fights are there at 154 aren't the kind of fights that he gets out of bed for. Maybe. I don't know. This is just what Eddie Hearn is saying. And I'm just saying this on the premise that Eddie is right and Terence don't fight again this year.
We'll see if he does.
So if he doesn't, I just don't think it's fair or at all objective to rate him ahead of, say, Inoue, who's fighting 3 times this year. He's a 2-time undisputed champion, like Terence. He's a 4-division champion overall, like Terence, and people are constantly hounding him to fight
this guy, fight that guy, move up to that weight.
this weight. And all the while, he's being more active than Terence. No, I don't think it's at all objective to rate Terence ahead of fighters that are more active than he is. I don't.
Oh, what? Activity doesn't matter to you on your list and you think you're being objective? You can rate him wherever you want.
But on the Ring IQ pound for pound list, activity matters. It matters a lot. Title defenses matter.
It all matters.
And if Terence Crawford sits out what remains of this year, as Eddie Hearn speculates, doesn't fight again, waiting for a Canelo Alvarez fight, that really doesn't better his chances now, does it? Allowing ring rust to further collect. I think a part of the reason that Terence struggled with Israel more than some people expected is because he hadn't fought in a while. So the way you remedy that is to keep active, keep busy.
Stay sharp.
If it is still his goal to face Canelo, well, you're going to want to be sharp the night of. You don't want to have to shake off ring rust with somebody like Canelo. How do you plan to win?
It's already a tall ask. Going up from 154 up to 168, for somebody like this, you're already older. You're already smaller.
You want to be less active too? I didn't hold it against Terence Crawford that he wanted to fight Canelo or wants to fight Canelo, like so many Canelo Alvarez fans who are now rallying against Terence Crawford. I don't think there's anything wrong with Terence wanting that fight.
Canelo's a big boy. He can take care of himself. He doesn't need you guys to defend him.
The way the Canelo faction of fans gets so bent out of shape whenever someone wants to fight him that you're getting bent out of shape over Terence, there's nothing to get bent out of shape about. That's what these guys do. These guys are fighters. And I don't think that Terence is clout chasing Canelo per se, the way that David Benavidez is. I think Terence genuinely wants to fight him. He believes he can beat him, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Even if I don't agree.
I don't like Terence's chances against Canelo. If Terence believes that he can take him on, he believes he can beat him, well, he's supposed to.
What I saw in the Madrimov fight, I think a part of it was ring rust, I do, but I also think a part of it was Terence needs more time to acclimate to 154, let alone a potential move to 168.
It's a big jump. So when he looks a little bit more human at 154 than he did at 147, a part of that is ring rust, because he's been out a while, and yet another part of it is, well, this is your 4th weight. The more you go up, the more difficult things become. Fighting naturally bigger fighters that are used to a naturally bigger punch, a better punch.
It's an occupational hazard.
Before the Madrimov fight, I entertained the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Terence stands a chance, and that's a big maybe, on the premise that there was still a lot left to the imagination, with the expectation that maybe he'll be as dominant at 154 as he has been at 147, though now that we've seen him,
the Madrimov fight was a rehearsal. If you can look good against Madrimov at 154, that betters your chances against Canelo at 168. Not because Madrimov is a carbon copy of Canelo.
He's not, but If you want us to believe that you can beat Canelo, at minimum, you need to look dominant against this guy. And he won the fight, but I can't say Terence looked dominant.
If that's still the goal,
You still want to fight Canelo after that? You need to stay busy. You need to stay sharp while you wait. If you are waiting for the phone to ring, if you are waiting for Canelo to play ball, you have to fight.
are you setting yourself up to fail?
If I had it my way, Terence would stay at 154. The focus of his plans at this late stage in his career would be becoming a 3-time undisputed champion, and even that may be difficult to do. It's entirely possible that what happened at 147 will happen at 154. The PBC will once again freeze him out. But if I had it my way, he'd stay there. He'd stay put.
See if you can unify. See if you can become a 3-time undisputed champion, which would be unprecedented in the 4-belt era. See about that. That's a more realistic goal. And if it's looking like it's going to take too long, if it's looking like history is going to repeat itself, then you retire.
It's a more realistic goal. With Canelo Alvarez and Crawford trying to fight him, his reach exceeds his grasp. I think that's a mountain that's just too high to climb.
And there's no shame in that.
It was already a crazy idea. Hopscotching from 147, pit stop at 154, all the way up to 168. It's ludicrous.
It was already a crazy idea. Though now that I've seen him at 154, I feel like that's just too high a mountain to climb. 168.
I think Canelo stops him. I think Canelo knocks him out, though I don't begrudge him his ambition. Why would I?
I just don't think it's a good idea.
So when Eddie Hearn says that he thinks for Terence, it's Canelo or nobody. It's Canelo or bust. That he may sit out what remains of this year, and that he may not return unless it's for Canelo Alvarez.
That he may not fight again.
It's not good news. Terence has seemed like a bit of a hard luck case. Frozen out of all the meaningful fights at 147 for a number of years, about 5, and moving up to junior middle wouldn't have been much better because the PBC had the run of the place up there too, so it would have been the same thing.
They would have froze him out up there too.
If he would have moved up a long time ago. With Terence, it feels like he's definitely one of the best fighters in the world, if not the best fighter in the world, but he didn't get enough chances to show us that.
Politics.
And being able to circumvent those politics came too late in his career.
Still very accomplished.
But the clock is winding down, and that's reality.